Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really significant story that's been unfolding around Harvard University.
Yeah, it's been getting quite a bit of attention.
We've got an article here that lays out some recent demands for reform coming from a pretty prominent voice, and Harvard's response. And, if you've ever wondered about the forces shaping higher education, especially these really influential, long-standing institutions, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Absolutely. We're going to try and get beyond the headlines.
Yeah, dig beneath the surface a bit and see what these developments really tell us about the bigger picture.
It's fascinating, really, how one single institution, like Harvard, can become such a focal point for these much broader conversations about, the purpose and the operation of universities today.
Definitely. So let's maybe start with a little context. Harvard's not exactly new on the scene, right?
Yeah.
Founded way back in 1636.
Ages ago. It's an incredible amount of history packed into one place.
And its motto, veritas, meaning truth, that's been central to its identity for centuries. It really sets a high bar, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And I think it's that legacy, that influence that makes Harvard a kind of bellwether.
How so?
Well, when debates about values or the direction of education pop up, an institution like Harvard, with all that symbolic weight, is often where those debates play out most visibly,
Precisely. Now, jumping to the present, a key figure in this recent development is Donald Trump. The article details his very public criticisms of Harvard and, more broadly, the pressures that he and his political allies have been applying to American universities generally.
Right. There's that recurring theme, or accusation, rather, of a bias towards left-leaning or liberal viewpoints within American universities.
Exactly. And this kind of raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? Like, what is the ideal role of a university?
Should it aim for perfect neutrality, or is it just inevitable, maybe even healthy, for diverse views to find a home there and sometimes gain prominence? That tension seems, right at the heart of this.
And it feels like this didn't just come out of nowhere. The article we're looking at points out that these criticisms, this push for reform, it really seemed to gain momentum after the events of October 2023.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So suggesting a link there?
Yeah, maybe a connection between major global events and this intensified scrutiny of universities. Plus, we need to remember the broader context, right? There's a segment of the conservative Republican movement that's openly stated its interest in more actively scrutinizing and influencing American academic institutions.
That timing is crucial, I think. Big global events often act as triggers, They prompt a reassessment of norms, of beliefs across different sectors, and education is definitely not immune.
Right.
And that interest from parts of the conservative movement in academia, that's not brand new, but specific events can definitely sharpen the focus.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of what was actually demanded. The article says that in April 2025, Donald Trump sent a letter to Harvard. A 5-page letter, apparently.
5 pages. Okay, so not just a quick note.
Not at all. And it wasn't just commentary. It included a demand for the return of financial donations. Over $1 billion worth. Can you even imagine?
Wow. Over $1 billion. That really underlines the potential financial power being wielded here and just the sheer scale of what's being contested.
Absolutely. So the letter officially called for Harvard to make some, pretty sweeping reforms across academic and administrative operations.
Okay, so broad changes.
Yeah, and it wasn't vague. The letter outlined specific areas. One was a call to reconsider the role that students and non-tenured faculty play in university governance.
That touches on a really ongoing debate within universities themselves, right? About who gets a say in shaping their direction.
Yeah.
Students, faculty at different career stages, administrators, they often have pretty distinct perspectives.
Makes sense. Another big point was a demand to reform the tenure process.
Tenure. Always a hot topic.
Right. The emphasis here was strictly on academic merit, with a stated goal of eliminating any consideration of social, economic, or religious disparities in university hiring.
Okay, so that goes right to the core of how universities recruit and keep their faculty, which, ultimately shapes the whole intellectual environment. The criteria for tenure are constantly debated within academia. Is merit just about traditional academic output, or should the value of diverse perspectives and experiences also count? That's the tension.
And interestingly, the article makes it clear these weren't just ideas for Harvard. They were presented more like a broader framework, something potentially applicable to American academic institutions generally.
That's quite ambitious. It suggests a desire for a much more widespread shift in how universities operate across the country.
Yeah, it seems so. The letter also specifically targeted programs in Middle Eastern studies and also programs related to diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Okay, specific program areas.
Yes, and there was a particular mention of concerns about anti-Israel bias in those areas. And here's a detail that kind of makes you pause. The deadline for reviewing these programs was set for the beginning of the 2023-2024 academic year.
Wait, 23-24? That deadline's already passed.
Exactly, which strongly suggests some kind of retrospective review was being demanded.
Huh. That backward-looking element is interesting. Makes you wonder what the real purpose was. Is it about finding past problems, setting a future standard, or maybe just making a symbolic point?
Good question. And finally, the letter called for creating an independent external body.
External, outside the university.
Yes. This body would be tasked with evaluating and auditing administrative reforms, faculty appointments, and how well the university's decisions align with its historical mission and the sort of overarching values of American universities.
Wow. Okay, that call for external oversight is a pretty significant challenge to the traditional autonomy universities hold dear. It implies, well, a certain lack of faith in the internal checks and balances.
So that's the set of demands. How did Harvard respond?
Well, the article is pretty clear on this. They rejected the demands outright.
Flat rejection.
Yep. They firmly asserted their independence and, crucially, the academic freedom of their faculty and researchers.
Which you'd expect, I suppose.
It aligns perfectly with that widely held belief that academic freedom is just essential for pursuing knowledge and allowing the free exchange of ideas in higher education.
Harvard also emphasized its commitment to having a variety of viewpoints within its community, both academic and administrative. And they pointed to their existing internal processes for reviewing things, essentially saying, look, we already have ways to handle this stuff internally.
Right. By highlighting their own review mechanisms, they're basically signaling that they believe they are accountable and that external interference isn't needed and could actually be disruptive.
A key part of Harvard's rejection, the article notes, was their concern that these demands could lead to faculty being dismissed just based on their views.
And that's something the university said it strongly opposes. It directly tackles that principle of academic freedom and the potential, chilling effect such demands could have on research and open discussion.
Yeah, definitely. And not surprisingly, Harvard also refused the demand to return the donations.
$1 billion.
Right. They emphasized their responsible stewardship of those funds, saying they're used to support the university's mission and its long-term future, its legacy.
And that makes sense. The endowment is the financial backbone for many of these top universities. Losing such a huge chunk would have massive consequences for their operations, their ability to function.
Harvard then went on to argue that accepting these demands would fundamentally compromise its independence and could, in the bigger picture, actually harm American higher education as a whole.
So framing it as a broader issue.
Exactly. And the university president apparently addressed the Harvard community directly, laying out the reasons for the rejection and really underscoring the need to stick to these core principles.
That direct communication is important, isn't it? Reinforcing their values, presenting a united front against external pressure.
This whole situation really does put a spotlight on the immense financial resources these elite institutions command.
Oh, absolutely.
The article gives some context on Harvard's finances. You got the Harvard Corporation overseeing this enormous endowment.
And that financial muscle is linked to their global reputation, right?
Yeah.
Attracting top scholars, researchers. The article mentions all the Nobel laureates associated with Harvard.
It's more than just prestige. It fuels their ability to attract talent, get research funding, exert influence. And while students pay tuition, of course, it apparently only covers a fraction of Harvard's operating expenses. They rely heavily on the endowment, which, according to the article, is somewhere around $50 billion.
$50 billion. Just pause on that number. It's larger than the entire economy of many countries. It really puts the scale of these resources into perspective.
It really does. And these funds are primarily earmarked for long-term investments. Meant to benefit the university, its faculty, its students for generations.
Right. It's not just a rainy day fund.
No. Their annual operating costs are over $5 billion. Now, the article also mentioned the university president's salary around $1 million a year, but it also notes that some faculty members actually earn more than that.
Okay, so that gives a bit of context to the internal financial landscape, addresses maybe some questions about where all that money goes.
And it was interesting, the article briefly touched on the history of endowments supporting higher education. It even referenced examples from Islamic history, like Al-Azhar University, where endowments were critical for funding education way back.
That historical context is valuable, I think. It shows this model, dedicated funds supporting academia, isn't some recent invention. It has deep roots across different cultures and civilizations.
So let's try and bring this all together. What we've seen is this significant push for change at one of the world's most famous universities.
Followed by a very firm defense from Harvard of its autonomy and academic freedom.
And underpinning it all are these truly staggering financial resources that these institutions possess.
Yeah, and when you step back and look at the bigger picture, this isn't just about Harvard, is it? It reflects these broader societal debates about the purpose, the direction, the very soul, maybe, of higher education in a world that's constantly changing.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. This whole situation, it raises some really crucial questions, doesn't it? About where the lines get drawn between external pressures, political, social, financial, whatever they may be, and those fundamental principles of academic freedom. And ultimately, what does this mean for the future path of higher education in the 21st century? What does it truly mean for a university, especially one with such a long, impactful history like Harvard, to stay true to its core values when it's facing this kind of intense public and political scrutiny?
It's definitely something worth thinking about long after this discussion ends.